Okay, so in this video, we're going to be looking at retaining walls on top of strip footings. So in this example, I've got four strip footings or four walls, two being normal panel walls and two being slightly tapered. And what I want to do is, if I just go in transparent mode, I've got reinforcement in these. The first one has rebar group reinforcement, the second one rebar sets. And then we have another rebar group for the tapered and another rebar sets for the tapered. Now, what I want to do is I want to manually reinforce this wall as a rebar group. And then I want to do the equivalent as a rebar set so we can see the difference in using rebar sets as a benefit to rebar groups just by detailing walls, and then also do similar for the tapers. It's going to be a very similar exercise except for the tapers got a slight difference to it. So let's get started. So what I'm going to do is just go into the plan view and I'll isolate the first one, and what I will do is I'll go to my view list and I'll open a grid view A. I'll also open, if I flick back, I'll also open grid view 1 so we can see it from the front. And then what I'll do is I'll grab this, let me just flick back here, I'll grab this and then just go to fit in all views so that we just isolate that in all the views so we can see a side elevation, a head-on elevation and a top elevation. Okay, so I'm going to start on the uh, front elevation, if you want to call it like that, by putting in the starter bars. Now, there are a few options with the starter bars, and I'll just explain them briefly to you. So we're going to be working only with rebar groups in this case. So the first option is to use the rebar shape catalog. Now, if you go in there and you open your shape catalog, you can pick an L bar, which is typically a starter bar for walls. You can allocate some dimensions by just clicking on this leg, filling in the value, clicking on this leg, and filling in the value. You can also drag this node around to where you want this to um, snap from, and then you can pick your rebar sizing, and in the grouping you can also pick some spacing values. Let's make that 200, and the front plane is say 25, and we'll just keep that for now. And if you say apply OK, you can then go hover over and you can see that depending on where you, let's go into 3D mode, depending on where you hover, this thing will snap and you can orientate your thing is. Now the issue I've got is that I want this to be in the footing and go up in the wall. Now the orientation of the bar is right there, but the plane is not right, which means you've got to do some magic to get it right. You see, you can flick, but it's always on the center of the wall. So in that regard, I mean, if you accept that now, it will put it there, but it's hard because now it's got this zero value for an on-plane value, yeah. And if you put in a value of say 50 there, it pushes us away from zero rather than away from the face. Um, I think an easier way to do it is just to manually reinforce this. So what we'll do is um, I'll click the rebar group and I'll make sure that I reset it to our default. We're going to be working with white valves, just a small bar, and I will pick a class of 4 just to distinguish between that and the foundations. And I'll leave all the others as is for now, and we can see how we can manipulate it. Now, Tekla is asking for a reinforcing part to reinforce. In this case, this particular starter bar will belong to the footing. And then once we've selected that, it's asking for the shape. Now I'm just going to pick an arbitrary shape. I'm going to click there and then right click, pick my perpendicular, snap to the outside of the wall, and then holding my control, click on the top. That will give me a temporary snap. And all I have to do is um, uh, point my leader up the wall and type in 700 because I want the 700 length there. And then once I've got that, I can middle mouse to accept the bar shape. And now Tekla's asking for 2 points to show the range. So the range will be from this point all the way to that point. And now we can see we've got our starter bars in there. Now, there's a few issues here, and they are all cover related issues and maybe bar leg because we just put an arbitrary value in there. So let's start by fixing up the bar leg as first. So this will be the first leg because it's the first one I selected. So in our property pane, we can go to the end, to the start, and instead of having a cover, we can force a leg length. And instead of having 25, we can force 200. That will give us an exact leg length there of 200. At the end there, you can see we've got a cover at the end there, but we wanted it to be 700. So the 25 as an end, we just want to make that 0. and that will give us the correct height. Now, if we look at the cover at the bottom, yeah, we want this bar to sit on top of that bar. Now, I'll just bring in my calculator here. If I just click on my calculator, and I'll show you how I work out the cover. So we know that the cover in the foundation to the ligature is 50 millimeters. The ligature plus the ligature itself is a 12 millimeter bar, which means its actual diameter is actually 14, because it's an end bar, it's a deformed bar. So we add 14 to that. And then plus the green dot you see there is a 20 millimeter bar, which means the actual diameter is actually 23. So if we add a 23 to that, we get a total cover of 87. So at the moment, if you look at this, there's a 25 there and a 25 there. And if you look at the on-plane value, there's 125. Now, if you specify one value there, Tekla is going to use 25 on all the faces. But if we start out with an 87 there, and I'll just enter, that will push the bar up, but it also pushes it away there. And then what we can do is go a space and say minus 25 on this side, and that will push the bar back. Now, on this side, yeah, we want this bar to be the second layer, not the first layer, and we want the horizontal bars to be the first layer. So what we need to do is on the 25, we need to add a 14 millimeters to that. So that will give us a 39 millimeters negative. So if we go 39, enter, that bar is now at the right spot and it's the right size and everything is good in terms of the front elevation. Now, if we go to the side elevation, we can just have a look at the spacing quickly. Now, if we just click quickly on the ligature here, we can see that that ligature actually starts, where are we, 100 millimeters off. So if we pick this bar and say we want to start the 100 millimeters plus the ligature plus the 14, that's 114 millimeters away. If we enter that, that will push that bar exactly to the inside of that. And now the other thing we need to look at is just the spacing itself. Now these bars, if you click on the ligatures, they are exactly spaced at 7 at 400, and we want 200 spacings on the starters. So what we can do here is we can say, instead of target, we can say we want exact spacings, and instead of 14 at spaces, so it will be 15 bars, 14 at 197, we can say it's 14 at 200, and if we do that, that bar then slots in perfectly with the rest. So in terms of elevation, that looks good. If in terms of the side, that looks good, and in terms of top, we can see that looks good. Now, what we can do now is, this is our XY plane, so we can copy in this plane. You always copy your XY plane. You can right click that and say copy special, copy mirror, and then what we can do is we can just pick a axis that we want to mirror around and say copy. Now that will then duplicate those bars on the opposite side, so we have our starters then dealt with. So as a next step, um, just get my front elevation again. As a next step, we want to do the vertical bars. Again, we go to rebar group, and we already know that this value here is going to be 39. We'll see now if it's a negative or a positive. That I'm going to reset back to follow the 100 of the ligatures, because we want to be in front of this one again. And for the length, we'll just stick to cover for now again. 25 there and 20. We'll fix these up now. We'll just see what the bar gives us. The rest I'm going to leave as is. And then what I'm going to do in here, I'm just going to say back to a target value again, so we can see it. These bars go into the wall, and then the shape of the bar, and I'm just going to go into 3D a bit, is going to be up the side of the wall, and I've got to click there, up this end, middle click to accept the shape, and then the range will be from this point to the back of the bar, and we can see it's placed the bars there. Now if we look in elevation, we can see that bar is exactly in line with that. It's got 25. Now imagine we've got a 50 millimeter concrete kicker here, so they can form the formwork of the wall against it. So for the start, what we'll do is we'll do a 50 millimeter offset in the start, and at the top, 25 is good because we have got a 25 cover on this wall, but I intend putting in a U-bar at the top, so I'll pull it back a little bit. So in there, I'll make it 100 millimeter down from there. So in terms of a front elevation, that bar is good. So if we just look at the side elevation, we can now see that that bar actually aligns with the ligature because its start point is back at 100 again. but the sequence is not good. As you can see, we losing sequence here. So what we can do is we can click on it. There's 15 bars. So again, we can just go to exact spacing and make sure that that is 14 at 200. Now, the reason why I like to use exact spacing in this regard is because once you go to your drawings, your annotations are easy and they're very round. You don't have silly dimensions. And secondly is, by doing this process, you're pretty much ensuring clash-free wall. Now, if we go back to our top view and we just grab that little dot that we've just done, again, we can just right click, copy special mirror, and we can pick our axis about which we are mirroring. And we can say copy, and that will duplicate it on the opposite side for us. Now that takes care of, if we look in 3D, of both sides of the vertical. And now lastly, for the vertical, I'll go back to my front elevation and we'll do a U-bar. So again, I'll click my rebar groups, and I'll just leave the settings as, actually, let's just neutralize the settings back to our default, and then I'll pick the same class again. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the wall, and then the shape of the bar, I'm just going to roughly draw in a U-bar around the top there. Just sort of not worry too much about the legs at the moment. And then I'm going to middle mouse to accept the bar, and then for the range, I'm just going to pick, the top of the wall there, and that will give us the U-bar. So in terms of the shape, again, what we can see is in this case, we've got three sides: first side, second side, third side. Now, our middle side, our side 225 is correct. We need to address side 1 and 3. So in our on-plane settings, we know that 39 is the offset because we calculated before. 25 for the second is correct, and then a 39 again for the last. If we then enter that, it fixes up our U-bar in terms of space. Now what we need to do is just quickly look at the leg length. So first thing I want to do is, instead of having a cover, now the cover is the difference between the dot and where the bar ends, the dot and where the bar ends. You can see it by the dimension there. I'm going to force this to be a leg length, force that to be a leg length, and the leg of this U-bar I'm going to make 500 millimeters, and that side also 500. If I accept that, you can see we now have two legs perfectly 500 millimeters, and it's sort of ignoring these handles now. Now, in terms of the front elevation, that shape is perfect. So if we go to the side elevation, we have an issue with the spacing again. Now, if we look at the alignment, we wanted to align with the starter bars this time. So we're back to our front plane 114 millimeters. And then for our spacing, we will have exact spacing, and again, it will just be 14 at 200. And once we do that, we can see that we have our U-bars perfectly placed. And if we go on the side, that's good. And if we go in 3D, we can see we've got a good result there. Now, just lastly, in terms of the of this exercise, I am going to draw a again, I'll just reset my defaults there and I'll pick a different color this time, maybe the light color 5 class. I'll pick the wall as the part we want to reinforce, and I'll pick the shape of the bar, and I'll just pick one of the bottom edges. Middle mouse to accept it, and the range will be from the bottom to the top, and that will place the bars in there for me. So if we look again in top, it's outside of the concrete. If we look on the elevation, we can see it's outside of the concrete. So all we need to do here is to click on it and then flick our on-plane setting from a plus 25 to a minus 25. That will flick the bar inside to where we want it. And then this cover here, which is the start cover, it's this cover here, we want to increase that to 50 mils because beg your pardon, it's not the start cover, that's the front plane cover. It's 50 millimeters. If I enter there, that will push it up to above the kicker. And at the top, we just want to make sure that we're also missing it there. So it's going to apply the 50 at the top there as well. Now, once we've got that, we can just look at the elevation from the side. And that all looks good because we've got the 25 there and there. Now, lastly, all we need to do now is just to add a hook on either side, a 90-degree hook. So once we've got that done, modify, we can see the hooks are going in the wrong direction. So we'll just change these to custom. And all we need to do is to still maintain a standard, is just to flick the direction of the hook to a negative and say modify, and that will flick it over to the other way. Now, once we've got that, Control P, we just go into the top mode. Once we've got that again, so we can select the bar, right click, copy special, mirror, and again we can just pick our axis we want to mirror about, and we can say copy, and we can say keep duplicates. And the reason why it's got duplicates there is because the bars are not actually in the same position, but the legs clash. It's picking up this. So what we can do to avoid that, we can go to our front elevation, and just one of these, what we can do with one of these is we can click on that bar and say instead of starting at 50, we can start at say 64, which is a bar away, a bar thickness away, and we will, and then also make sure that I'll just click on the previous one, make sure we never set the exact spacing on this. So on this one, I'll say exact spacing, and the spacing is 7 times 200. And then make sure that we do the same here and go exact spacing, and it's also 7 at 200. Now, because they have a different start, they will be spaced a little bit differently. So that is 50 and that is 64. Okay, so when you get something like that, with the copy process, it swapped the handles around. So what you can do in this case is you can, just on the top, push that into 50. So now it's measuring from the top there, as you can see from the start handle there, and that pretty much is done. So that is a rebar group. So we'll keep that view, and we'll kill the elevation because we don't need that elevation anymore. I'll go back to my 3D view and right click and say show entire model. So we finished with the first one. So what I'll do is on the second one, we have to just enable a second view on the B grid. So we'll go B grid, and then in this grid, what I'll do is I'll accept all of that and say fit in all views. So now we're only seeing that particular wall. Now in this wall we've got rebar sets, and I'll really show you how effective rebar sets is in this regard. So what we can do here is we can say rebar crossing bar, and make sure that I load my standards just to make sure everything is set to defaults again. And again, I'll just change my color to a class 4. I'll keep it as is for now. I'll hover over the wall shape, and this time I'm going to pick only those 3 legs and leave it open at the bottom and say OK. And now we've got a big U around the top of the wall. So what we can do now is if I click on the bar and I enable my leg faces, I can then click on this leg face. Make sure that in your context toolbar, you force movement in a perpendicular direction. And then what we can do is we can just drag this down 400 mils, which is to the bottom of the base. We can click on this edge and drag this down 400 mils to the bottom of the edge of the footing. So that will leave the bar there. And now what we can do is if we click on that, click on the edge again, and then enable 3D movement again. We can hold in our control key, click on that, and just drag this out 200 millimeters, which will give us a leg there. Drag this out 200 millimeters, which will give us a leg there. Now, because these are rebar sets, Tekla is quite smart. You can see it's already taken cover into account. Although, our leg goes all the way down to the bottom of the concrete, it's already figured out where the leg is. And if I click on this leg and I click on the leg face, you can see it's also a layered number. But let's move that into the third layer to put it on top. It will probably be built in the bottom layer. That's theoretically probably the correct place to put it. But just to show you the strength of Tekla rebar sets, that you can manipulate your layers. So just like that, we've got that done. Now all we need to do is split this bar into the starters and the U on top. So I'll switch off my leg faces, and then what I'll do is I'll click on the bar. I'll go over to my splitter, make sure that I load my defaults just in case I've got dodgy settings there. And then what I'll do is for the lap, instead of setting middle, I'm going to say give me a right, and I will hover over this little face here. We just sometimes you just need to click nicely. Now I've picked the wrong edge, but I'll fix that up now, and we can do the same on the other side. So what we can do here is if we pick that one, we can just go here and flick it to the left and say modify, and that will flick the splice to the other side, and we can say left modify. Now think of this, if you look at where those bars are splicing, it starts right there on the top of the footing. Now, we need a 50 mm gap there so they can form a kicker to fix our formwork to. So what we can do now is if we click on those two splitters, we can, on the split offset, we can just add 50 mm in there and say enter, and it will move the whole splice up. So then that will give us our starter with our vertical. We can do the same on the top by just introducing a splitter. So again, we go splitter and we go load defaults because this time we want in the middle. And if we then hover over the leg of the bar, you can see how Tekla works out, the leg length. If I was over the concrete, it will give you an offset from the concrete, but if you hover over the bar, you get a bar leg. So if I click there, we've got 500 on that side, and if I click over this bar leg, and let me just get the leg nicely done. There's so many. If I go there, you've got 500 that side. So now if I go out here and I select down the bottom here the enable a group in a rebar set, and I click on the use, right click, inquire, we can see we have two 500 legs exactly with 150 in the top. Now we've done all of that with a single bar, and this is still single rebar groups. If I just go to the sets again, you can see it's still a single rebar group, although we've got it broken up into three different parts. The last thing we need to do here is just to add our longitudinal reinforcements. I'll pick longitudinal. I will make sure that my standards are loaded, and then I'll hover over the wall and pick the outer side and the inside and say, okay, I'm happy with that. And that will add the distribution steel for us. Now, on the previous one, we had that on the other side. Now, this is where rebar sets are really good. If I click on that bar and I go over here to our contextual toolbar and say move to the outermost, it will just flick those two around. Where this is not really possible with rebar groups, you have to manipulate the cover. And that's it. So all we need to do now is if we click on these, we can just add an end detail, load the standard, make sure that it's a cog, hover over the edge there, and that will add the cog for us. We can do the same with the other ones. Click on this one and say add an end detail to this edge of the concrete and also to this edge of the concrete. So once we've done that, what we can do is just have a look at, I'll escape out of the command so you can see all the, we've got overlapping. So there's two ways of addressing this overlapping. The one way we can do it is to, again, just move the bars like we did before. The other way that we can do is, especially if these hooks are a little bit long, I'll show you that method just for the sake of, if we click on this line, we can change the hook direction to 7 degrees, so that brings it up a little bit. And we'll click on this and we'll do the same on this side, go 7 degrees. That will just rotate it down a little bit. And now we have to do the opposite on the other side. So if we click on this one and we click on this modifier and we say -7 degrees, that will bring it up. And if we click on this one and this modifier and we go -7 degrees, that will flick it down. Now, I wouldn't necessarily do this, because these hooks are quite short and it fits well within the wall. But it's very applicable if these hooks are longer and it actually pokes out or it encroaches in concrete. You can rotate them up because that's what they normally do on site. But the nice thing about this is it looks a bit funny when you're looking from the side, but if you look from the elevation, these bars are in line now, and just the hooks are sort of twisted, but it sort of makes for nice drawing and dimensioning and so forth. And that pretty much wraps up, I think, this one. So if we say model the whole, show the whole area, we can actually go back and kill this view because we won't need it anymore. And yeah, we can say entire model, and we will next use the modeling for the taper, the first taper. Now, just before we move on to that taper, you can see how quickly we've been able to model this wall as opposed to the first wall. And basically, this one is going to be a repeat. I'm just going to show, I don't think I'll detail the full walls on these because it's pretty much a replication of what we did. Yeah, but I want to show the starters. So if we go to view and we go list and we say give us a section on C, that will give us a view on C. And if we grab all of that and say right click in all views, we then get that part only in the views. That's it. And you Control P to get it square on. Okay, so in this case, what we're going to do is, because this, let me just click on this to make sure this should be rebar group. So this is rebar groups again. If we go to rebar and we go to groups, load our standards again, we can then say we want to add the starter to the foundation. And if I click there, just make sure that it takes, right click perpendicular up to there, and then holding your control key and snap to the top, that's a temporary snap. And if we hover over, we can say 700. That will give us to the top of that, and say middle mouse to accept. And then the range will just be from the front to the back of the wall. And that will pretty much add the starter for us. And now, just like we did before, and we know the values here already. So first thing is our start is a leg, and the leg is a 200. So it takes care of that. Our cover at the bottom is 98, and the cover on the side is minus 39, and that will take care of that. And then at the end over here, we know that we've got a 0 there to get the same bar length. So that pretty much wraps that up. So let's just look at the side. So in the side again, we want to push this along. So on our front plane, we go 114 millimeters. That will place that inside there. And for our spacing, once again, we go exact spacing, and it's 14 bars at 200. And that sorts out the spacing for us. So now that we've got that bar, we can go back to our elevation and do the other side. Now, what I like to do is I click on the bar and then enable my construction line tool, and then just draw a horizontal line across there so we can see where the other bar is going to end. Now, the reason why I'm doing that is you could just follow this line and 700, but they're going to be on different lengths because this is a sloping side. And then when you do the U, you're going to have to compensate for that as well. But if you have a point there, it will sort of sort itself out. The other thing I want to do is just enable the construction line and just draw a line down here so we can get an intersection at the bottom here, which we don't have. Okay, so if I click group and I initiate, or I select the foundation because that's where we want to add it, I'll just pick an arbitrary point up to the intersection, and then all the way up to where our construction line is, and then middle mouse to accept the shape, and then our range will be from here to the back of the, and just like that we've got our thing. Now, because we had the settings from the previous one, we already have our 200 leg correct, we've got our spacing, our cover correct here, we've got our cover on our wall correct here, and we also end up with 0. Now, because there's a little gap there because it's perpendicular, it's perpendicular to that, so that all works quite well. Now, all we need to do now is to do the U. Now, instead of having a straight bar, we just need to put a U on the top. I think for this exercise, that will be good. So what I'm going to do is this time I'm going to say, and I'll leave the settings so we can see how we can fix it. If I click the wall, I can say that this U will go from there to the top to the back of the wall, and then all the way down to this point over here, and then middle mouse to accept the shape, and then for the range we'll just pick the length of the wall. And you can see that came out really funny because of the settings we had for below. So the first thing we're going to do is, we know that this is our first leg, so on our first leg we're going to say let's just make it 0 for there, and that's a cover. And our second leg is going to be a 0, and that's cover. And if we accept that, it already fixes up that. And now we need to look at the cover. Now we know for the cover on the sides it's minus 39, on the top it's 25, and on the other side it's 39. Now that is not a negative, it's a positive, so we'll just get rid of the negatives. And if we then say enter, that fixes up the U. Now at the moment this U starts and stops where the starter stops. So what we need to do is just increase a lap there. So what I'm going to say here is the cover is actually minus 450, which is the lap for a 12 millimeter bar. And if I say that, we can then say we increase the lap there. Now, all we need to do, if we look at the elevation, is to make sure that this U-bar starts in the same plane as the ligatures. So that will be 100. If I do that, that sort of moves them along. And then in terms of the spacing, it remembered the previous, which is 14 at 200. So that all just works out. So that pretty much sort of, would be my approach for dealing with this tapered sort of wall. Now, I'm not going to do the horizontals because it's exactly the same as before. And what I'm going to do is I'll kill that view, go back here, enable the whole model, and this time I will select a view on D, grid line D, and I will select all of grid line D and just say right click, fit all views. So now we get that part in all the views. Now this is rebar sets. So for rebar sets, what we'll do is the approach is very similar to before. It's just much easier. So if we go to a crossing bar and we'll load our standards, just in case we have dodgy settings, and I'll make it class 4. Hover over the section, and again, I'm just going to select the back, the top, and the front, and say OK, and that will create the bar for us. When I select the bar, I can then go and enable our leg visibilities again. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to extend the leg. So if I click on this leg face, make sure that my move in a perpendicular direction is enabled. And then what I can do is just drag this down 400 millimeters to the bottom of the leg. And this one, you can see it actually drags in plane. So you don't have to worry about that you're going to go out of plane. And that drags that down. And now what we can do is click on this one again and enable the 3D move. And I'll just rotate this down a bit or around. And I'll hold in my control key, drag that 200 millimeters. That will create a new leg for us. Drag this 200 millimeters. That will create a new leg on this face. And again, you can see Tekla has figured out that's in layer 1. And just for the sake of it, we can click on this one, change that to a layer 3, so it sits on top. And we can click on this leg face and make that 3, so it sits on top. So that pretty much takes care of that. So the only thing that's left to do is just to introduce the two splitters. And I will take off the leg faces, click on the bar again, and then say splitter. And because we know the split's going to have an offset of 50, we can just type it in there right now. And let's just pick right and see if we're right there. And then I can just hover over that edge there. Sometimes it's quite tricky to get this edge. Sometimes you just need to sort of rotate around a bit until it sort of comes up. Click there, and that's correct. And then do the other side as well. Again, we'll have to just scroll around a bit, and that's correct this time. So now we've dealt with the starters, so you can see they're all pretty much in line. So the only thing we have to do now is to Control P is to look at the elevation and make sure that these actually coincide with these. So what we have here is we've got let me just see what this is, 107 millimeters. So in here what we need is 107 plus 14. So if we type, where's my start? In my start here, if we type in, what is that, 121 millimeters, that will put it, oh, I haven't done the math right. So this is 107 and 14 is 121. That's 121. That is auto-calculate. Spacing value is exact, and it will be 14 at 200. If we do that, let me just see my direction quickly. My direction is correct, so I'm not quite sure why that. It still doesn't clash anywhere, but for some reason I did not work out. Oh, hold on. That is 107 to the center. So if we add another 7 to that's 140. So that must be okay. So if we change that to 114, let's just see what happens then. Yep, that's good. So if we look at that, that's pretty much the same we had as before. We've got our starters and we've got our U-bars going over the top. This is only I think this wall is only, if I go F and I measure the height of this wall, it's only 1500, 1.5 meters, so it pretty much is doable. It's not very long bars. So again, I'm not going to do the horizontals because it's exactly the same as before, but in terms of dealing with starter bars in the form of a rebar set with a tapered back, it's pretty easy to do. I hope you enjoyed this video and looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.